It happened on a warm Saturday afternoon in early spring. The air smelled like cut grass and barbecue smoke, and the garden was set up beautifully white canopies, long tables covered in pink linens, and delicate roses tied to every chair. My cousin Hannah was getting married, and the whole family had gathered at the big ancestral house in the countryside. It was supposed to be a joyful day, but right from the start, something didn't sit right in my chest. I arrived with my daughter, Maria, a bit later than expected. Duty had called that morning, and I had to leave a briefing early to make it. She wore her little cream dress and held a handmade card for Hannah. She was so excited she hadn't seen her cousins in years. The moment we stepped onto the lawn, I felt eyes turning. Not at me, but at the man walking slowly behind me, leaning heavily on a wooden cane, wearing his old brown coat and neatly polished shoes. My father. "Why'd she even bring him?" I overheard someone whisper. "He barely knows what's going on anymore. Just look at him, that coat must be older than me." I turned my head slightly, catching the face behind the voice. My aunt's son-in-law. He laughed, not knowing I heard every word. My father didn't flinch. He walked on, calm and steady, eyes scanning the yard like he was reading the wind. But I saw the way his knuckles whitened around the cane. He had heard them too. "Let me take you back a little. My father, or Grandpa, as everyone else calls him now, used to be a steel worker. A strong, proud man with soot on his cheeks and burns on his forearms. He raised us after my mother passed away, me, my two brothers, and my sister. He never remarried. He never complained. But age has a cruel way of peeling back a man's strength. His legs grew stiff, and his words grew slower. Sometimes he repeats himself. Sometimes he forgets. But what he never lost was his dignity. He still puts on that brown coat every Sunday to go sit in the park and feed the pigeons. Says it reminds him of when he used to take us kids out for ice cream. The rest of the family, though, they began to see him as a burden, a thing to hide away. My brother moved to another province. My sister said she couldn't afford to take him in, and I, being the one with such an important job, was apparently too busy. That was the joke in our family, that the one in the police uniform must have no time for diapers and soup bowls. But they didn't know that I had moved him into my house 5 months ago, that I'd hired a nurse to come by each morning, that my daughter drew him pictures and called him Captain Grandpa because of the stories he told her. They didn't know, because I didn't feel the need to tell them, until that wedding day. Back at the garden, the speeches had started. People laughed, glasses clinked, cameras flashed. I kept my arm lightly on my father's back, helping him ease into a chair. His breathing was a little shallow. The long walk across the yard had winded him. "No space here," said a cousin, motioning that the seat beside her was for someone else. I nodded politely and helped him sit at a table near the back, close to the garden gate. It was quieter there. Maria sat beside him, her little hands fidgeting with her bracelet. Then it happened. The microphone squeaked as Hannah's new brother-in-law took the mic. He was a young man, the kind who always wore sunglasses on his head even at night. Loud, always laughing. He tapped the mic a few times. "Before I begin," he said, smirking, "I just want to thank everyone who came today, especially the honored elders among us, like Mr. Grandpa in the back there. I hope you enjoyed the buffet and didn't scare the caterers too much." There was a wave of laughter, too loud, too long, and then silence. Not the kind that happens when people go quiet, but the kind that spreads like spilled wine, dark and uncomfortable. My hands tightened into fists under the table. Maria looked up at me, her eyes big, uncertain. My father just stared at the tablecloth, and that was the moment I stood up. I didn't plan to speak. I hadn't even told anyone I would be attending in uniform. I'd just come from headquarters, and still had my navy blazer on badges, pins, polished shoes. To them, I was just Cousin Elise, quiet, worked somewhere in the city, but the silence begged for a voice. So I walked to the front, past the tables, past the long rows of chairs and startled faces. I took the mic gently from the young man's hand. He looked surprised, like I'd walked into a room I wasn't supposed to see. I cleared my throat. Then I looked out over the sea of relatives. Some of you know me as Elise, I said quietly. Some of you, barely at all. That's fine. I work in the city. I wear this uniform. Maybe that doesn't matter to many of you. I paused, then turned slightly, so everyone could see my father at the back table. But the man sitting right there, the one you've called forgetful, useless, or invisible, he matters more than any of you know. He didn't just raise 4 kids alone. He raised officers, engineers, nurses, and a head of national police. Gasps. Not loud, but clear enough. I protect this country with the strength he gave me. Every rule I enforce, every badge I wear, has a piece of his voice in it. When he told me, as a girl, always do what's right, even when no one's clapping, I didn't know those words would guide my entire career. I looked around again. Some eyes dropped to the ground, others blinked rapidly. He is not a burden. I continued. He is the reason I'm standing. And the reason you are too, because while you were sleeping through childhoods, he was working double shifts to pay for the very weddings you're sitting at today. My voice never rose. I didn't shout. But the words didn't need volume. Only truth. I walked the mic back to its stand. Nobody moved. Not even the birds. Then, slowly, I walked toward the back table again. I held out my hand. Come on, Captain Grandpa, I said with a smile. He stood, slowly, proudly, took my arm, and we walked down the garden path, past rows of stunned silence. As we reached the edge of the gate, a few people stood, then more, until half the yard had risen to their feet. No applause, just presence. The young man with the mic had turned pale, and my daughter. She beamed like the sun was hiding inside her chest. Have you ever watched someone you love be treated like they were nothing and felt the weight of silence press against your chest? Have you ever stood up, not out of anger, but out of love? Please share your story in the comments below. Someone out there might need your voice to find theirs. We didn't stay for the cake. I helped Grandpa into the car, one hand under his elbow, the other carrying Maria's cardigan. The air was cooler now, and the sun had begun to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the old wooden fence inside the car. I watched him sit quietly, staring out the window. His hand rested gently on his knee, fingers tapping softly, like he was playing a song only he could hear. Are you all right? I asked. He didn't speak at first, just nodded, then whispered, Your mother would have cried today, but not the way she used to. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The words hit something deep, something old, and sore. He leaned his head back, closed his eyes. I never minded being quiet, but there's a difference between being quiet and being made invisible. I sat there in silence beside him, knowing exactly what he meant. You know, people always assume that once you wear a uniform, once you carry authority, you're no longer vulnerable, that you've outgrown pain, that you don't feel humiliation. But they forget before we were officers, or professionals, or parents. We were children. We remember the voices, the dismissals, the looks that said, You don't belong here, and those memories don't disappear when your badge gets shinier. I was 5 years old the first time I saw my father come home bleeding from his hands. He'd slipped while carrying rebar, didn't even take off his boots before checking my homework. His palms were torn, his back soaked in sweat, but his voice was soft when he asked, "Did you eat today, baby girl?" Years later, when I made it into the academy, I called him first. Not my friends, not my boyfriend. Him. He didn't say much, just, "Told you. You've got bones of fire." He doesn't say things like that anymore. The words take too much effort now. But he still holds my hand during storms, still folds his socks just right, still hums old folk songs while watering my plants. That's what they forgot at the wedding. They forgot he still is. That night, after we got home, Maria went to bed early. I sat with Grandpa on the porch, a blanket around his shoulders and a thermos of warm ginger tea between us. The neighborhood was quiet. A few dogs barked in the distance. The street lamp flickered slightly, casting gold over the pavement. He turned to me suddenly, his eyes clearer than they'd been all day. "Do you regret speaking up?" he asked. I shook my head. Not for a second. He nodded, then chuckled. "Then don't apologize for it." I smiled. "I won't." We sat there for a long time, two shadows, side by side, one old and steady, the other newer but just as weathered. I remember thinking this is what legacy feels like. Not fame, not celebration, but presence, endurance, the quiet strength of showing up. A few days later, my phone started buzzing with messages, not official ones, no press, no public announcements, just family, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, aunts, even Hannah. One message read, "I'm sorry. I didn't realize how far we'd drifted. You made us remember." Another simply said, "Tell Grandpa I miss him." I didn't reply right away, not out of pride, but because I wanted to be sure I wasn't answering out of emotion. I waited a day, then wrote one thing back. "You're welcome to visit him. He's here. He's always been here." A few did, quietly, without flowers, without cameras, just tea and listening. A week later, I walked into my office to find a small envelope on my desk. No return address, just a note inside. I used to see him walk to the corner shop when I was young. He once gave me his umbrella when it rained. "Thank you for reminding me." It was signed with initials only. And that's when it hit me. People don't forget kindness. They just bury it under the noise. Sometimes it takes one small moment, one stand, one truth, to dig it back up. You might be wondering if Grandpa ever brought it up again, the wedding, the insult, the speech. He didn't. He didn't need to. But a week later, when we passed by the park, he looked at a group of teens sitting on the bench, laughing loudly, and whispered with a small grin, "Let them laugh. They'll learn." I nodded. They always do. And we kept walking. I've thought a lot since then about what it means to be a voice. Not just in courtrooms, not just on national television, but in backyards, in quiet rooms, at family tables. It's not about speaking loudly. It's about speaking clearly. When it matters. When silence becomes agreement. I didn't speak that day at the wedding because I was angry. I spoke because I refused to let the people I love be made small in rooms they helped build. Sometimes the greatest power isn't in leading thousands. It's in standing up for one. A few weeks after the wedding, I received a call at the station. It wasn't an emergency, no red alert, no high-profile briefing, just a soft voice on the line, barely above a whisper. "Hello. Is this Elise?" "Yes. Speaking. This is Mrs. Hahn, from the old city district. I think I need help, but not the kind you'd usually send cars for." I paused. Mrs. Hahn used to run a tiny bookstore next to Grandpa's favorite noodle shop. I remembered her thin silver hair, square glasses, always a thermos of chrysanthemum tea in her hand. As a child, I'd sit in her shop for hours reading old comic books while Grandpa bought rice and onions across the street. Of course. Mrs. Hahn, I said. Tell me what's going on. I found something. She said. Something about your father. That afternoon, I drove over myself. She met me at the door with a careful smile and eyes that had seen more than they let on. Inside her dusty little shop, among shelves that leaned with age, she handed me a thick manila envelope, worn and creased. I meant to give this to you long ago, she said, but your father asked me not to. Said you had enough to carry. I opened it slowly. Inside were old documents, yellowed papers, some torn at the edges, handwritten notes, photos, military stamps. It wasn't just about my father, it was his record. My breath caught in my throat. I had known bits and pieces, that he served in the early National Guard, that he'd done some work overseas before I was born, but he never spoke about it. Said it was better left in the past. But here it was: official assignments, commendations, citations for bravery, a certificate recognizing a hostage negotiation during a foreign conflict, a photo of him in uniform, younger, leaner, with the same steady eyes, and at the very bottom, a letter addressed to me, dated 7 years ago. Elise. If you ever read this, it means Mrs. Hahn finally ignored me and did the right thing. I didn't want you to carry my past on your back. But I see now, maybe the weight you carry isn't a burden. Maybe it's what makes you stand tall. You always reminded me of the silence before lightning, that moment right before everything changes. I'm proud of you. Even when I forget how to say it. Love. Dad. I sat down on the floor of her shop and wept like a child. Mrs. Hahn didn't say a word. She just placed a warm cup of tea next to me and patted my shoulder. I filed a motion through official channels, even though I didn't need to. I wanted it to be done properly, respectfully, and when the documents arrived, they confirmed what I had begun to suspect. My father had once been offered a higher position, one that would have taken him away from us permanently. Overseas command, classified work. He declined. The note on the bottom of the form read, "Reason children too young, no greater mission than raising them." That broke me. He had chosen us, the very people who now ignored him at tables, the family that called him senile, the ones who forgot what he'd already given up. That Sunday, I invited everyone to lunch. No occasion, no speeches, just a quiet gathering at my home. I didn't tell them why. When they arrived, cousins, aunts, uncles, they were surprised to see Grandpa sitting at the head of the table, dressed in his freshly pressed shirt, hair neatly combed, his cane beside him like a sword. He didn't speak much, just nodded as they entered, offering the same faint smile he gave strangers in the park. After the meal, I stood up, walked into my room, returned with the folder. "I'd like to show you all something," I said. Calm and measured, one by one, I passed around the documents, the photos, the letter. I let them read. The silence in that room was thick. No one looked at Grandpa, but I did, and he, in turn, stared at me, not with surprise, but with a kind of gentle, private understanding, like he knew I had finally seen all of him. When the last paper had made its round, I said one sentence. He never wanted a thank you. He just wanted us to see him. No one spoke, not for a long time, but when people left that afternoon, they touched his shoulder. Some hugged him. One cousin knelt beside his chair and whispered something with tears in her eyes. It was a beginning, not an apology, but a beginning. You know, sometimes families don't hurt each other out of cruelty. Sometimes they just get used to a certain version of someone: the silent dad, the tired grandpa, the man with shaky hands. And they forget that before all that, he was a protector, a fighter, a man who chose them every single day. I had to become the head of national police to see my father as more than an aging man. I hope you don't wait that long. 2 months passed. Life went on, quietly. Grandpa's health held steady for a while, some good days, some slower ones. He loved sitting by the window with Maria, watching her sketch birds. Sometimes he'd tell her old war stories, full of dragons and maps and secret doors, even if they didn't always make sense. She listened with a seriousness beyond her years. He never mentioned the wedding again, or the folder, or what happened at that Sunday lunch. But something changed in him, something subtle. His shoulders rested straighter. He smiled more often, and on one bright morning, he asked me, "Do you think I could go for a walk again, just up to the park?" We went together. He wore his brown coat, buttoned all the way up even though the sun was warm. He gripped my arm gently. We walked slowly past the bakery, past the fence with the roses, and all the way to the little wooden bench by the pond. A group of teenagers was playing music nearby, loud, thumping beats. But when one of them noticed Grandpa struggling to sit down, they rushed over. "Need help." Sir Grandpa blinked, surprised. "I think I've got it, young man." The boy smiled, nodded, and stepped back. We sat in peace for a while. Birds swooped over the water. A breeze rustled the leaves. And for the first time in years, I saw my father not as someone fading, but as someone still here. That evening, Maria brought him a drawing. It was of him standing tall in a navy uniform, with a crown of olive leaves and a medal on his chest. He laughed gently, brushing her hair back. "Is that supposed to be me, sweetheart?" She nodded proudly. "You're a hero, Mom told me." He looked at me then, not with pride, but with something more delicate, something like peace. "Thank you," he whispered, "not for the drawing, but for everything else." 2 weeks later, he fell asleep in his chair and didn't wake up. No struggle, no pain, just stillness. I found him that morning with the softest smile on his face, his hands folded, his cane resting beside him like it had always been there. I didn't cry right away. I sat down across from him and stared out the window. Then I whispered, "You can rest now." The funeral was small, just as he would have wanted. No grand speeches, no fancy flowers, but people came. People I'd never met. A quiet man who ran a train station Grandpa used to visit. A former neighbor from the apartment complex before we moved. An old soldier with medals pinned to his chest who simply stood in silence and saluted. And then came the surprise. As we carried the casket from the chapel, a row of uniformed officers lined the path outside, not just from my unit, from units across the region, retired officers, young recruits. A few even came from the academy. One by one, they raised their hands in salute. Maria gripped my hand tightly. "Why are they doing that for Grandpa?" I bent down and whispered, "Because once, a long time ago, he stood for all of them. Now they stand for him." She looked up, solemn, then raised her small hand to her forehead, mimicking the salute. Her cheeks were pink with effort. It was the most beautiful moment of my life. After the funeral, we didn't go straight home. We stopped at the park, sat on his favorite bench. I opened the folder again, not to read, but to remember. The ink, the creases, the faded stamp marks, they had become more than documents. They were proof of presence. And then I did something I hadn't planned. I stood up, walked to the center of the park, and left his cane leaning gently against the old tree. Not out of sadness, but as a marker, like a soldier leaving a flag behind. People ask me, sometimes, how I managed to stay strong in this job. With all the darkness, the cases, the politics, I always say the same thing. My father taught me that silence is not weakness, and love is not always loud. That strength is not about having the last word. It's about standing beside someone, even when the world turns away. So here I am, still wearing the uniform, still leading, still listening. But now, every time I sit at a family table, or walk through a neighborhood, or visit a school, I carry him with me, not in grief, but in honor, because the man they once insulted was the reason I became who I am. And I hope, when it's my time to go, someone, maybe Maria, maybe someone else, will look back and say, she stood quietly, but she never let love be forgotten. After Grandpa passed, the house felt different. Not empty, just quieter in a way that made time feel slower. The sound of the kettle whistling in the morning lingered longer. The old wood floors creaked louder under my feet. His brown coat hung on the wall beside the door, untouched. I didn't move it. I didn't wash it. I left it just the way he last wore it. Collar folded down, pockets slightly puffed from the little candies he always carried for Maria. She kept asking questions for days. Where is Grandpa now? Do you think he can still see my drawings? Will he be at the park when we go? I answered as gently as I could. He's resting now. But yes, sweetie, I think he can see them. I think he always did. She looked up at the sky a lot that week, and sometimes I'd see her whispering, like she was still telling him stories. It comforted me more than I could explain. A few days later, I received a sealed envelope at work. It was hand-delivered by one of the junior officers, who looked puzzled. No sender. Chief. Just this. Inside was a letter written in sharp, familiar handwriting. It was from one of my uncles, the one who had stayed silent at the wedding, hadn't said a word since Grandpa passed. Elise. I didn't know how to say this in person. We all thought we understood the man, but we didn't. We just grew used to his silence. We mistook it for emptiness. What you did standing up, showing us who he was, it shook something in me. Made me think about my own kids, about what they'll remember. Maybe it's not too late to change. Thank you for carrying him so we could finally see your uncle, David. I folded the letter and placed it in the same folder as Grandpa's military documents. Not because it was official, but because it was proof. Proof that one person's dignity when guarded can wake up a whole room. Later that week, I visited the academy to speak with the new recruits. It was part of my regular rounds, sharing leadership lessons, discipline values, stories of real field cases. But this time, something in me shifted. When I stood before them, a row of sharp uniforms, bright eyes, unsure hands, I didn't start with tactics or rules. I started with Grandpa. I told them about the man who chose his children over command, who gave up a title so he could walk home each night to cook rice and watch cartoons on a tiny screen. I told them about the insults he bore quietly and the strength he showed without fanfare. And I ended with a question: what kind of legacy are you willing to build if no one claps for you while you build it? The room was silent, a good kind of silence. And that day, a few of those recruits stayed behind after the lecture, not to ask questions about procedures or promotions, but to ask about him, about the man behind my uniform. They wanted to know how he raised someone like me, and I told them, not with punishments, not with medals, but with stillness, with presence, with consistency, and a hand on my shoulder when I was lost. That night, I dreamed of him. He was standing by the park bench again, but this time he wasn't old. He looked young, strong, his back straight. He turned to me, smiled, and simply said, "Keep your feet in the soil, and your heart in the clouds." I woke up with tears on my pillow. A month later, I got a call from the mayor's office. They were planning to rename the small park near our house the one where Grandpa always sat, in honor of a quiet citizen who served the people long before titles were ever handed out. They asked for my approval. I said only this. He would have laughed and said, "Don't be silly. Just give the pigeons a better bench." But I gave them the approval. And one Saturday morning, a new plaque was installed beneath the tree where we had left his cane. It read, "In memory of Thon Vu Father, Protector, Silent Strength. He sat here." And so, we stood. Maria brought flowers. The teens who had once helped him came too in clean shirts, with respectful hands in their pockets. And I wore my uniform. Not for ceremony, but because it was part of him. You know, legacy is not a word you write in headlines. It's the imprint of footsteps that others follow without knowing who walked first. It's the tea mug left on the table, the smell of old paper, the way someone speaks kindly when they don't have to. That's what Grandpa left me. Not gold, not power, but a way to stand. And I will keep standing so that Maria learns how to kneel beside the right people, and how to rise when others are too afraid. There's something strange that happens after someone you love passes. The world keeps turning, but parts of you stop. Not completely, just enough that you notice. Like reaching for a second pair of chopsticks at dinner, like hearing a laugh on the street that sounds like theirs, like folding laundry and pausing, because the scent of a shirt reminds you of a hand on your shoulder 30 years ago. That's how grief shows up. Not as a storm, but as soft echoes. And yet, life called me back. The department had a new corruption case. The media started buzzing about protests. My calendar filled again. Briefings, debriefings, closed-door meetings. They pulled me into rooms with generals and whispered about strategy. But in the back of my mind, always he's not sitting by the window anymore. Still, I did what he taught me. I showed up. I stood still when others flinched. And I listened. Then came a strange day. It started with rainlight at first, then heavy. My boots soaked within an hour, my coat stuck to my shoulders. I walked into the department with my hair tied back, files under my arm. There was a man waiting for me in the lobby, tall, thin, wore a suit 2 sizes too big. His hands shook slightly as he removed his cap. "Chief Vu." "Yes." He looked nervous. I'm sorry to come unannounced, but I knew your father. Long ago. We served together. In Cambodia. 1979. I blinked. "Come in," I said, motioning to my office. Inside. He sat slowly, looking at his hands. "He saved my life," the man said. "Your father. During a skirmish. He stayed behind to drag me out. Bullet missed him by inches. Never talked about it. Just handed me a pack of biscuits afterward and said, 'You'd better name your first kid after me.' I did." He smiled. Tears welled up in his eyes. "My son is Than. I never forgot. But I couldn't find him for years. And now," his voice trailed off. I placed my hand gently over his. "You found him," I said. "He's still here." The man reached into his coat and handed me a photograph. It was grainy, black and white. 4 young men in uniforms, sitting on a makeshift bench under a palm tree. One of them, my father, had a cigarette in his mouth and a grin like mischief. I'd never seen that expression on him before. "May I keep this?" I asked. He nodded. "It belongs with you now." That night, Maria and I added it to the photo wall at home. She asked, "Why did Grandpa smile like that?" I knelt beside her. "Because sometimes, even in war, you find a moment of peace, and you remember what you're fighting for." She touched the photo gently. "I want to fight for people too." I kissed the top of her head. "Then start by listening to them. Like he did." Months passed. The house grew quieter, but not lonelier. Letters arrived. Visitors stopped by. A small documentary crew came asking to tell his story not just as a war hero, but as a man who raised a future leader in silence. I agreed. On one condition: no dramatics, no music swells, just truth. They nodded, and when it aired, people called from everywhere, not just officers but shopkeepers, cleaners, teachers, drivers. One woman wrote I saw him once on the bench. I was crying. He didn't ask questions, just gave me a tissue and said, "The sky always clears. Miss." I never knew his name. Thank you for letting us know him. That's when it hit me. His legacy didn't come from his title or his service. It came from what he gave away: attention, presence, stillness. That's what people remembered. One Sunday morning, Maria came running in with her sketchbook. I drew something for Grandpa. I opened it. It was our family standing under a giant tree. Grandpa sat on a bench, cane in hand, birds flying overhead, and next to him, a little girl with her head on his shoulder. "It's us," she whispered. I hugged her tightly, and I thought maybe this is how we stay alive, even after we're gone, in someone's picture, in someone's pause, in the moments when a child remembers how a man once sat quietly beside her and made her feel seen. We didn't lose Grandpa. We became him. Every time we look beyond a person's silence, every time we speak up for someone whose voice is trembling, every time we choose presence over pride, we carry him forward, not in stories, in action.